They told me I'd never save anyone because I couldn't even save myself from drowning during training. 3 years later, I pulled 8 Marines out of a sinking Humvee with my bare hands. Before we dive in, tell us, where in the world are you watching from? If you enjoy stories like this, make sure to hit that subscribe button, because tomorrow's episode is truly mind-blowing. Let's get started. My name is Celeste Rivera, and I failed my Coast Guard rescue swimmer certification 4 times. 4 times I went under in those training pools. 4 times I came up gasping and defeated while my instructors shook their heads. My father, Colonel Diego Rivera, spent 30 years in the Marines teaching young soldiers that failure isn't falling down, it's staying down. But watching me struggle in that water, even he started to wonder if maybe some dreams just aren't meant to come true. I remember the exact moment I knew I was different from the other recruits. We were practicing victim extraction scenarios, and while everyone else moved through the water like they were born in it, I fought every stroke. My technique was wrong, my timing was off, and my confidence was completely shattered. The other trainees would finish their laps and climb out breathing normally, while I hung onto the pool edge, lungs burning and heart hammering against my ribs. But here's what nobody understood, including me at the time. Every single failure was teaching me something that would matter more than any certification could. Every time I went under, I learned how panic feels in your chest. Every time I struggled against the current in training, I memorized exactly how the water moved in Virginia Beach. Every time an instructor pulled me out of a scenario because I was taking too long, I was actually learning patience under pressure that the quick swimmers never had to develop. The irony is brutal and beautiful. The very thing that made me feel like a failure, the very reason they kept me on shore duty while my friends deployed on real rescues, became the exact skill set that would save 8 lives on the worst day of my career. Because when that emergency call came through, when those Marines were trapped in a sinking vehicle in the exact waters where I'd failed so many times, I knew those currents better than anyone else in the Coast Guard. I knew them intimately. Personally, the way you only know something that has humbled you over and over again. This is the story of how repeated failure became perfect preparation, and how the worst day of my training became the best day of my life. The fluorescent lights in the Coast Guard station break room buzzed like angry wasps as I stared at the letter in my hands. 4th rejection. The words blurred together, but I'd memorized them already. Does not meet minimum proficiency standards for rescue swimmer certification. Captain Morrison had delivered it with the kind of sympathetic look that somehow made everything worse. My phone buzzed. Mateo, my younger brother, calling from his patrol boat somewhere off the Carolina coast. Unlike me, he'd aced every test. The Coast Guard threw at him. Natural athlete, natural swimmer, natural everything I wasn't. "Cell, I heard about the test results." His voice crackled through the phone. "I'm sorry, sis. I know how much this meant to you." I pressed the phone against my ear, trying to keep my voice steady. 4 times, Mateo. I've failed this thing 4 times. Maybe everyone's right. Maybe I should just accept the desk job and stop embarrassing myself. Hey, don't talk like that. You've got other talents. Your rescue coordination skills are incredible. Remember that fishing boat incident last month? Your radio work saved 12 people. But radio work wasn't what I dreamed about. Since I was 8 years old watching Coast Guard rescue swimmers on television, I'd wanted to be the person jumping out of helicopters, the one diving into impossible situations to bring people home. I wanted to be like my father, Colonel Diego Rivera, who'd spent 3 decades pulling Marines out of dangerous situations across the world. The break room door opened, and Petty Officer First Class Nolan Chen walked in, still dripping from pool training. He was one of the certified swimmers, one of the heroes who got to deploy on real missions while I pushed paperwork. "Rivera, how'd it go?" he asked, though my expression probably told him everything. "Same as always," I said, folding the rejection letter. "Apparently I swim like a drowning cat." Chen sat down across from me, his expression serious. "You know what your problem is? You think too much in the water. You're so focused on perfect technique that you forget why you're there." "Easy for you to say. You passed on your first try." "Yeah, but I've never seen anyone study water conditions like you do. You know every current, every tide pattern, every dangerous spot within 50 miles of this base. That's not something they teach in swim class. My father's words echoed in my head something he'd told me after my third failed attempt. Mija, the ocean doesn't care about your test scores. It only cares about your heart. He'd said it while sitting in his favorite chair, his hands shaking slightly from the early-stage Parkinson's that was slowly stealing his strength. Even facing his own battle, he still believed in mine. But belief felt pretty worthless when you're stuck monitoring radio communications while everyone else gets to save lives. I was 24 years old, watching my dream slip away one failed test at a time, wondering if wanting something badly enough was ever actually enough. Tuesday morning started like every other day of my disappointing career. While certified, swimmers prepped their gear for water operations. I sat at the communications desk monitoring weather reports and radio chatter. Storm clouds had been building over the Chesapeake Bay since dawn, turning what should have been a routine training exercise into something more serious. "Rivera, you're on shore communications today," Captain Morrison announced, which was code for, "You're staying safely on dry land while the real rescue swimmers do the actual work." I nodded and tried to look professional instead of defeated. By noon, the weather had turned vicious. Wind speeds hit 40 knots and the bay transformed from choppy to downright dangerous. I watched through the station windows as whitecaps crashed against the pier, feeling that familiar twist in my stomach. These were exactly the conditions that had destroyed me during my certification attempts. That's when the radio exploded with static and panic. Coast Guard, this is Marine Transport Unit Bravo 7. The voice was young, male, and absolutely terrified. "We've got a vehicle collision on the Chesapeake Bay Bridge. Our transport truck went through the barrier. 8 Marines in the water. Vehicle is sinking fast." My blood turned to ice. I grabbed the microphone with shaking hands. "Marine Transport Bravo 7, this is Coast Guard Station Virginia Beach. Confirm 8 personnel in water. What's your exact location?" "We're approximately 2 miles northeast of the bridge span. Vehicle is going under. We need immediate assistance." Captain Morrison burst into the communications room. "All certified rescue swimmers to stations immediately." His voice carried the kind of urgency that made everyone move faster. "Get the helicopter prepped for immediate deployment." But then everything went wrong at once. Petty Officer Chen rushed in, his face grim. "Captain, both certified swimmers are deployed on that cargo ship emergency 40 miles south. They won't be back for at least an hour." "What about the backup helicopter?" "Mechanical issues, sir. Grounded until further notice." I stared at the radar screen showing the location of those Marines. My heart sank. I knew that exact spot better than anyone in this station. It was where the main channel current met the bridge outflow, creating a swirling nightmare of conflicting water patterns. I'd been pulled under there 3 times during training. I knew every deadly current, every underwater obstacle, every reason why rescue swimmers avoided that area in good weather, let alone during a storm. Captain Morrison's face went ashen as he calculated response times. Backup units are at least 25 minutes out. In these conditions, in that location, he didn't need to finish the sentence. We all knew what 25 minutes meant for people in 50-degree water fighting those currents. The radio crackled again, weaker this time. "Coast Guard, please. Hurry. We're losing people. The vehicle is almost completely submerged." 8 Marines were dying in water I knew better than my own backyard, and I was the only person in this building who truly understood what they were facing. Captain Morrison stared at the radar screen, his jaw clenched so tight I could hear his teeth grinding. The red blip marking the Marine's location pulsed like a heartbeat, and with each second, that heartbeat was getting weaker. "We cannot deploy uncertified personnel," he announced to the room, but his voice carried no conviction. "We'll have to wait for backup units." I did the math in my head. Backup helicopters from Norfolk, 25 minutes minimum. Add prep time, flight time in. These conditions and rescue operations, we were looking at 40 minutes before anyone reached those Marines. In 50-degree water with those currents, they'd be unconscious from hypothermia in 15 minutes. Dead in 20. My hands moved before my brain caught up. I stood up from the communications desk and walked toward the gear locker where the emergency rescue equipment was stored. "Rivera, what are you doing?" Chen called out. I grabbed a life vest, emergency flotation device, and rescue lines. "Those Marines don't have 40 minutes. Celeste, sit down. You're not certified." Captain Morrison's voice cut through the room like a blade. "Sir, I know those waters better than anyone in this building." I slung the emergency pack over my shoulder. I failed in them 4 times. I know exactly where every current hits, where every underwater obstruction is, where that vehicle is going to settle. That's not the same as being qualified to perform rescues. I thought about my father, Colonel Diego Rivera, lying in his hospital bed just last month after his Parkinson's symptoms had worsened. Even with trembling hands, he'd gripped mine and said, "Mija, there are 2 kinds of Marines in this world. Those who follow orders and those who do what's right when orders aren't enough. Sir, with all due respect, those are Marines out there." I headed toward the door leading to the boat dock. "They're my father's Marines." Chen stepped in front of me. "Rivera, you can't. Morrison's right. You're not certified. What if you drown out there? Then we've got 9 people to rescue instead of 8. I looked him straight in the eyes. "Chen, what if I don't try and they all die? Can you live with that? Because I can't." The radio crackled with another weak transmission. "Coast Guard, we've lost 2 people to the current. Repeat, 2 Marines are no longer with the vehicle." That decided it. I pushed past Chen and ran for the patrol boat. Captain Morrison's voice followed me. "Rivera, if you take that boat, you're facing a court-martial." I fired up the engine, my hands steady for the first time in months. "Court-martial me later, Captain. Right now, I've got Marines to save." The boat lurched away from the dock as Morrison's final transmission reached me over the radio. "Rivera, God help you, and God help those Marines." I pointed the bow toward the bridge, toward the storm, toward the water that had defeated me so many times before. Today felt different. Today I wasn't swimming for a test grade. The scene that greeted me was worse than anything I'd imagined during training. The military transport vehicle sat half-submerged against the bridge support, its roof barely visible above the churning water. 6 Marines clung to whatever they could grab while 2 others floated face down about 30 yards away, carried by the exact current I'd been pulled into during my second failed certification attempt. I cut the boat engine and dove in, without hesitation. The moment the water hit me, something incredible happened. Instead of the panic that usually seized my chest during tests, I felt a strange calm. Every muscle memory from my failures kicked in, but this time they worked for me instead of against me. I reached the first floating Marine, Corporal Jamie Hendricks, barely conscious and blue around the lips. "I got you," I told her, using a modified rescue hold I'd developed during my 3rd failed test when the standard technique kept failing me. It wasn't textbook, but it worked. Swimming back to the boat with Hendricks was like navigating a puzzle I'd solved before. I knew the current would push us left near the bridge support, so I compensated right. I knew the underwater debris field was exactly 12 feet from the vehicle, so I swam wide. Every failed attempt had mapped this underwater death trap in my memory. After securing Hendricks in the boat, I went back for the second floating Marine, then turned toward the main group still clinging to the sinking vehicle. Each rescue built on the last, muscle memory and water knowledge combining into something that felt almost supernatural. The most critical moment came when I reached Sergeant Taylor Vaughn, the driver, who was still trapped inside the rapidly flooding cabin. The vehicle was tilting forward, and I had maybe 30 seconds before it went completely under. "I can't get my leg free," he gasped, water up to his chest. I took a deep breath and dove under the dashboard. In the murky water, my hands found what my eyes couldn't see. The steering column had shifted during impact, pinning his leg. During my 4th failed test, I'd gotten tangled in similar underwater obstacles and learned how to work by touch alone when visibility was 0. I braced my feet against the floorboard and used a technique that definitely wasn't in any rescue manual, something I'd figured out during one of my most embarrassing training failures. The column shifted just enough. "Now!" I shouted as we both broke the surface. The vehicle disappeared beneath the waves 2 seconds later. As I helped Vaughn toward the boat, my radio crackled with Captain Morrison's stunned voice. "Rivera, I count 8 Marines in your boat. All 8 are accounted for and responsive. How the hell did you pull that off? I treaded water for a moment, looking back at where the vehicle had been. My chest wasn't burning. My technique hadn't been perfect, but every single person was alive. Turns. Outfailing a test 4 times teaches you things that passing it once never could, sir. 2 weeks after the rescue, I stood in a conference room facing a panel of Coast Guard officials, expecting the court-martial Captain Morrison had promised. Instead, I found myself looking at commendation paperwork and 8 written testimonies from the Marines I'd pulled from the water. Captain Morrison read from the official report with something that almost looked like pride. Petty Officer Rivera demonstrated exceptional knowledge of local water conditions and employed unconventional but highly effective rescue techniques under extreme circumstances. Her actions directly resulted in the successful recovery of 8 military personnel who would otherwise have been lost. The door opened, and my father walked in wearing his dress blue Marine uniform. His hands shook from the Parkinson's, but his spine was straight and his eyes were clear. He'd driven 4 hours from the hospital to be here against doctor's orders. Colonel Rivera, the review board chairman, acknowledged him with respect. My father's voice was steady despite his condition. Gentlemen, I've spent 30 years training Marines for impossible situations. What my daughter did wasn't luck or accident. It was preparation meeting opportunity. Every failure she experienced was actually advanced training for a scenario none of us could have anticipated. Admiral Patricia Walsh, the senior officer on the panel, leaned forward. Petty Officer Rivera, your rescue techniques weren't standard protocol. Where did you learn them? From failing, ma'am. Every time I went under during certification, every time I got disoriented or panicked, I learned something new about how water moves and how people react when they're drowning. The Marines I rescued weren't following textbook victim behavior. They were terrified, hypothermic, and fighting the water. I knew how that felt. 3 days later, I took my certification test for the 5th time, but something had fundamentally changed. I wasn't swimming for a grade anymore. I was swimming as someone who had already proven herself when it mattered most. My technique still wasn't perfect, but it was real. Tested under conditions, no training. Pool could simulate, I passed. The ceremony felt surreal. As they pinned the Coast Guard Achievement Medal on my uniform, I thought about Corporal Hendricks, who'd sent me a letter that morning. You didn't just save my life. You showed me that sometimes our biggest failures are actually preparation for our greatest moments. I'll never look at setbacks the same way again. My father managed to stand for the entire ceremony, his trembling hands clapping as Admiral Walsh read the final citation. For exceptional heroism and life-saving actions that exemplify the highest traditions of the United States Coast Guard. After everyone left, my father and I sat alone in the empty ceremony room. Mija, do you understand what really happened out there? He asked. I saved 8 people. No. You discovered that there's a difference between being perfect and being prepared. Those Marines didn't need a perfect swimmer. They needed someone who understood failure well enough to succeed when success was the only option. Sometimes what looks like repeated failure is actually repeated preparation disguised as disappointment. The very experiences that humble us most completely become the foundation for our most important victories.